The Air Force Research Lab does some incredible work in this area, and it's a real privilege to be a part of this community and to see the other terrific presentations. So I'm going to be talking about today the Department of Defense's Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. I suspect if you're the type of person who is interested in this conference, you are also the type of person who has already heard of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. But I will give sort of an in-depth view of what we're up to, how we view the issue of DoD AI transformation, and also some of the ways that you can do work with us as a partner, both in government and in industry. So to begin, I'll just say one little thing about how we view the world of artificial intelligence. And I think this is a sort of a helpful framing device for everything else. If you can recall that traditional software can also provide artificial intelligence. The DARPA framework for AI includes sort of two big categories of AI. One, handcrafted knowledge, which uses traditional software, and the other for machine learning, which is really the bedrock of modern artificial intelligence progress. I think what's so interesting about that double categorization is that the former path to artificial intelligence, handcrafted knowledge, is essentially the intelligence is a long series of rules, and those rules are the computer code. When given this input, run this operation, then generate this output. And if you add together the aggregation of all of those rules and instructions, you can get something that is reasonably intelligent for a specific application. So an example is a heat-seeking missile knows how to automatically change where its fins are pointed and how to alter thrust in order to go towards a target. And that type of artificial intelligence has been with us since the mid-1950s. We've been good at this sort of thing for a long time. Machine learning also has its roots in the 1950s, but over the past decade has really seen a tremendous amount of progress in a very short period of time. And the primary distinguishing characteristic of machine learning, of course, is that rather than human hands typing out every single one of those rules, you expose a learning algorithm to training data, and I'm oversimplifying a bit here, but it programs itself. It comes up with its own instructions for how to execute a given task, whether that's navigating a missile, analyzing financial data, or doing something else. And so the key distinguishing factor between modern machine learning artificial intelligence and traditional handcrafted knowledge artificial intelligence or traditional software really is this relationship with data and where the intelligence of the system comes from. And what I think is useful in that analogy is thinking about what is the arc of transformation in DoD AI. Well, I think it's likely to be quite similar in many ways to the arc of transformation for traditional software. Computers have been a part of the Department of Defense really since the 1920s, which is when the first sort of computationally aided artillery aimers came into being. And the first autopilots were also in the 1920s and 1930s. The Norden bomb site in World War II actually had a mechanical-based computer that took control of the aircraft over from the pilot, flew the aircraft to a given location based on the inputs given by the bomb site operator, and then opened the bomb bay doors under its own control based on the instruction set and the data that were given to it from both onboard sensors and the computations of the bomb site operator. And so my point is we've been through this for a long time, even before the Alan Turing-based cryptography and universal computer type revolution. And so how should we think about the revolution and the transformation of DoD AI in an era of machine learning? Well, I think many aspects of this process are going to unfold over decades. But I think the big distinguishing factor between what the Department of Defense did in the mid-1940s after it had seen the potential of computers in World War II and what we're doing right now is that we're undergoing a conscious strategy to accelerate the pace of that transformation. You heard in the introductory remarks today, Bryant mentioned the DoD AI strategy, which came out in the middle of 2018. And that strategy basically said, rather than what we did in the mid-1940s and 1950s, which was primarily give computers over to a few specific user communities, such as the cryptography community, this time we're going to consciously seek to disseminate this technology to as many different types of user communities as possible, because we recognize that over decades, we expect artificial intelligence to be useful for just about every single type of activity that the Department of Defense engages in, whether that's in the back office business processes or the very tip of the spear in modern weapons applications. We think that artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology with extraordinary potential basically rivaling that of the original invention of computers. And we want to consciously seed adoption of this technology productively to as many user communities as possible. So the DoD AI strategy, which again came out with as part of the National Defense Strategy, was the document that described the creation of the Joint AI Center. And it names the Joint AI Center as the focal point for the DoD AI strategy. And now the DoD director of the JAIC is a direct report to the Deputy Secretary of Defense, and we are empowered to drive the transformation and the changes needed to enable transformation across the DoD. And so with that excessively long introduction, I'd like to move into the next slide. So here we talk about the fact that AI is already transforming warfare. AI as a general purpose technology already has some remarkably powerful applications, whether that's natural language processing to analyze massive amounts of documents in order to extract useful insights, or whether that's using computer vision algorithms to understand what's coming in geospatial or other types of imagery. There are already applications in use where AI based on machine learning is dramatically more powerful than the approaches that it replaced. As just one example, many Department of Defense research communities spend a lot of time and money working on facial recognition algorithms in the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s. And this was a really stubborn problem, despite the hundreds of millions of dollars that were thrown at it and the number of PhD genius researchers who devoted many years of their lives to tackling this problem. And it wasn't until we learned how to restructure this problem from a handcrafted knowledge approach in which we tried to type out all the rules to analyze image data to detect faces and restructured it into a machine learning problem. How do we identify high quality training data sets and expose those training data sets to the right learning algorithm, that we saw massive improvements in performance, such that now under the right operational conditions, it's totally practical to see facial recognition algorithms with accuracy well in excess of 99%. Again, assuming the right operational conditions. And so my point is that while we are already seeing, a tremendously appealing applications that have national security applications, from intelligence to business processes and back office to warfighting, we're really just at the early stages of that. And the role of the Joint AI Center is a little different from other types of organizations in the Office of Secretary of Defense. The role of DARPA, for example, is primarily to advance the state of the art in AI research. They're really looking to go beyond what the best in industry and academia are already doing and bring the future a little bit closer. The Joint AI Center's mandate is primarily to accelerate the adoption of the existing state of the art, as it is already present in commercial industry and academia. So our question is, given what's already out there, how do we adapt that for Department of Defense use cases? And how do we accelerate the adoption within the department by identifying the technical, policy, or process barriers that are slowing that adoption? Next slide, please. So this is the 4 priorities of the Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. The first is enabling, and we at the JAIC very much do view ourselves as an organization that defines success based on what we enable for other organizations across the Department of Defense. So we partner with organizations all across DoD and the military services, and they describe to us, what are challenges they're facing for specific problem areas and applications, or what are broad-based blockers that are slowing their adoption of AI. And we provide services that are designed to lower those. So as just one example, we manage the Joint Common Foundation, which is an AI and machine learning developer environment that really enables the best of breed DevSecOps capabilities with the specific tool sets and capabilities such as cloud computing based on GPUs that you need for machine learning type projects. And we provide those services to organizations that don't want to have to start from scratch and set up their own development infrastructure. And we can provide them an accelerated pathway to a cybersecurity authority to operate, which, as I'm sure many of you know, is a key blocker in terms of actually getting stuff underway when it comes to software in the DoD, including machine learning software. The second thing we do is we actually build and integrate key AI applications. And this is sort of a changing mandate that the JAIC has had evolving alongside the Department of Defense. So when the JAIC was created in the middle of 2018, outside of the research community, there wasn't a great deal going on in the department's AI ecosystem in terms of driving adoption and utilization. And so one of the things that we sought to do as the JAIC was to just get our hands dirty, actually trying to develop and field AI capabilities in contexts that were not safety critical or life and death type applications, because we wanted to accelerate the pace of lessons learned for what it's like to actually run AI adoption projects in the DoD, and then disseminate those lessons learned to other stakeholders across the department. Now that we have actually quite a few projects under our belt and some helpful lessons learned and some helpful success stories, our focus is much more on key missions that serve as enablers from a technical perspective to the entire Department of Defense, such as the Accelerating Data and Artificial Intelligence, or ADA initiative that was recently announced by the DepSecDef, or alternatively, key joint AI-enabled capabilities that are real priorities for specific mission sets as identified by the Joint Staff, the Office of the Secretary of Defense, or other sort of key stakeholder communities. And that's programs such as our Smart Sensor, which is an autonomous ISR asset that makes heavy usage of artificial intelligence and is actually built in critical partnership with AFRL, which is providing one of the key underpinning computational capabilities. The next thing we talk about is advocate and drive, and that really gets to the various parts of the Department of Defense that really need to understand what artificial intelligence is, how it can be used for them, and also to just help people get through the various processes that can kind of be a challenge for this. So in addition to actually building the capabilities that I mentioned earlier, right, in the build and integrate, we also capture lessons learned and disseminate best practices documents that are designed to accelerate the pace at which everybody else can undertake their own AI projects. As I mentioned before, the DoD AI strategy names the JAIC as the focal point of that strategy, but we are by no means the only important thing going on in the DoD AI community, and we really view the nature of our success as what we enable other folks in the Department of Defense to achieve when it comes to AI. And then the last thing we're trying to do is to establish a productive ecosystem based on ethical foundations and AI safety. That's why I'm so excited about the nature of this conference and its focus area. We at the Department of Defense not only want to have the trust of the warfighters who are going to be using our AI-enabled capabilities. We don't just want to have that trust, we want to deserve that trust. We want to be worthy of that trust. And that comes down to what are the policies and processes and standards and testing and evaluation practices that we need to develop and master in order to ensure that AI-enabled capabilities work as intended when the mission is on the line, when lives are on the line. Next slide, please. So the wrong way to view this slide would be to say that the Joint AI Center views itself as the center of the universe. We most certainly do not. But what we're trying to highlight with this slide is the diversity of partnerships that we actually have and the diversity of the types of organizations that the JAIC works with as an implementation-focused partner. So as you can see on the right, there are so many different organizations doing terrific work when it comes to AI research and development. But so many organizations have significant challenges when it comes to implementation or crossing the valley of death between R&D and actual fielding of technologies. And so the JAIC is really trying to identify what are the barriers that are slowing down fielding of these technologies, what are the things that make adopting AI technology difficult, and how do we accelerate that adoption? And that's through providing enabling technologies and infrastructure that can lower the technical barriers. That's through identifying needed reforms to DoD workforce practices, actually creating new types of job descriptions and billets and training programs that will be implemented DoD-wide. And as I mentioned before, thinking about policy and process reforms, for instance, on areas like data sharing that can really just make everybody's life easier when it comes to fielding functional AI capabilities. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned before, we're really focused on this transformation through enablement. Next slide, please. And this iceberg, I think, gets at what we mean when we talk about the JAIC's focus on enablement. I think the wrong way to think about AI would be to imagine specific applications that you want and really say, go build me an AI that does X. That's really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to enabling AI for the entire Department of Defense. Because if you want those applications, there are so many other things that you need to master as organizational competencies and be able to provide as organizational services in order to actually support and ensure the success of those AI-enabled applications. And so this beneath the iceberg is really the JAIC focus and sweet spot. And that comes to areas like test and evaluation as a service. So as I'm sure many of you in the audience knows, machine learning software not only works differently from traditional software, it also breaks differently than traditional software. The failure modes of machine learning software are unique and distinct from those of traditional software. And whereas the Department of Defense is like the world-leading experts in test and evaluation when it comes to hardware failure modes, and has extraordinary, deep bench of talent when it comes to software failure modes, we do not have the same organizational mastery of the processes and testing procedures needed to run machine learning software through the rigmarole. And right now, that actually represents a barrier to adoption of AI-enabled capabilities. So for instance, all major defense acquisitions programs, all major weapons systems must be approved through a safety standard called Military Standard 882 Echo. And that standard for system safety has extraordinarily high benchmarks for performance when it comes to system safety. For anything involved in the use of force, the standard is it must fail fewer than 1 in 10 million times. Well, right now, we don't actually have the testing procedures that can demonstrate conclusively that most types of machine learning systems will fail less than 1 in 10 million times. And so a bottleneck to fielding these systems for safety critical applications is the gap in testing procedures. And so while I mentioned that the JAIC really does not get involved in basic research, one area where we are determined to accelerate whatever we can on the basic research side really is on testing and safety practices, because we have identified that as a bottleneck to accelerating the adoption of DoD AI, and we want to do whatever we can to eliminate that bottleneck. Not by skimping on safety standards, not by ignoring or bypassing safety standards, but by developing the testing procedures and technologies that will enable us to meet those rigorous safety standards so that we can, as I said before, earn and deserve the trust of the warfighters who are counting on our AI-enabled systems. The next thing is AI project management as a service. As I mentioned, we have a lot of reps under our belt in terms of running AI projects in the DoD. And we're familiar with the challenges, both those that relate to machine learning as a technology and those that relate to DoD bureaucracy and processes. And we're happy to provide, advice, best practice guides, and others to those across the DoD who need to learn from our experience, both our successes and our failures. We're happy to share our lessons learned. So those are just two of the diversity of the things that we're working on as we seek to build the DoD AI ecosystem. But I hope that I imparted upon you that every single one of these is as deep and as nuanced as what I just described for test and evaluation and AI project management. The organizational mandate of the Joint AI Center is incredibly broad, incredibly diverse, and incredibly deep. We have a lot on our plate because that's what it takes to transform the Department of Defense, a $750 billion organization. Next slide, please. We want to drill down on a few of these services that we provide. So the first is responsible AI. Ethical AI is an absolute priority for the Department of Defense. When the US military fights, we want to be the good guys. We do not want to be the bad guys. And so that means actually living up to the ethical standards under the United States, both those enshrined in law and those enshrined in our values as the Department of Defense and the United States military. But in an organization of 3 million people, how do you know and show that what you're doing is ethical? And fortunately, the Department of Defense affirmed in 2020 and again in 2021 6 AI ethics principles, which I think are so helpful in describing what it means to be a responsible organization using AI for the types of applications that the DoD is going after. And right now, we're really focused on driving implementation of DoD AI ethics to ensure, that even those who are well-intentioned but might be, at risk of getting it wrong in an organization of 3 million people, how do we make sure that doesn't happen and that we get it right every time? Next slide, please. Test and evaluation, I already talked a bit about, but I do want to mention one thing, which is for government organizations, we actually are now releasing a contract vehicle that includes test and evaluation providers from industry services. And that's really useful to DoD organizations who are interested in using AI, but don't want to go through their own market research at identifying who might be useful companies when it comes to doing test and evaluation for machine learning capabilities. The JAIC has already pre-vetted this series of companies who are now on this contract vehicle that is available for use throughout the entire Department of Defense. And we have already written, best practice contract language that ensures the Department of Defense preserves all the rights that it needs when it comes to testing and evaluation of machine learning enabled systems. So that's just one more T&E service that we're providing to the entire DoD. Next slide, please. Data science is intimately related to recent progress in machine learning. And this is another area where we're doing a bunch to try and help folks across the DoD. So that Mill Suite Mill book you see there, that's an example of where many of our AI best practice guides can be downloaded. We have one on AI-related project management for the DoD. We have ones on test and evaluation. We have ones on data management. We have developed a suite of data cards and model cards that provide helpful metadata for associated data sets in line with DoD standards that can help developers understand what they're getting their hands on when they're seeking to repurpose other data sets that folks in the DoD have already developed or used. And finally, they also, again, have here a bulk purchase agreement, a contracting vehicle available to folks across the Department of Defense if they need data curation, data management, data pipeline engineering type services. And that's something that we think is going to be useful to folks across the DoD AI community. Next slide, please. The Joint Common Foundation, I mentioned a bit earlier, but this is that infrastructure and development platform for machine learning enabled capabilities. And if you develop your stuff on the JCF, whether you're an industry partner working with a DoD organization or a DoD organization that is doing some stuff in-house, we believe that if you do your work on the JCF, you will not only have access to all of the tools and capabilities that you need to succeed in developing AI capability, you will also be able to take advantage of the broader DoD AI community that is already working on the JCF, whether that's code libraries that are available for reuse, or that's pieces of data or data sets that are have been developed by other folks in the DoD that you can reuse. And as I mentioned before, if you develop on the JCF, there's a lot of favorable conditions in there that will provide you a faster path to a cybersecurity authority to operate, which in many cases is really the long pole in the tent for getting stuff done when it comes to DoD machine learning initiatives. Next slide. And finally is our acquisitions. So we recognize how hard it is to do business with the DoD, both on the industry side and on the DoD side. We have created the TradeWinds OTA, Other Transactions Authority, that really makes it easier for both businesses and for the government to do business with each other. That's a really rapid contracting mechanism. And we have already let multiple contract vehicles, the T&E bulk purchase agreement, the data readiness for AI development vehicle, DRAID. These are just the tip of the iceberg of where we're going in trying to lower the acquisitions and process barriers for the DoD when it comes to buying and fielding mature commercial AI technology. So that's what I was hoping to cover with you all here today. And I thank you so much for your time and for the opportunity to join this terrific conference and to get a window into the AFRL community. Thank you all for your time, and I'll sign off here.